Hello and welcome to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Chris Chermak, this week. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll bring you some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage on Monocle Radio. We've got highlights from our studios here at Midori House and from around the world. This week,
perhaps it was precisely the Freedom Plane's departure that made it so successful, taking these symbols of national identity out of the capital and into the hinterlands.
That's Greg Scruggs, our Seattle correspondent, hopping aboard a Freedom Plane. It's a traveling exhibition of 9 of the founding documents of the United States, which is forming part of the America 250 celebrations. We're also looking ahead to the upcoming Brazilian presidential elections, and we'll hear from the artist behind Monocle's album of the summer.
I didn't see myself as a Latin American person a few years ago because we are kind of isolated in this continent. So nowadays it's so beautiful that we see ourselves as Latin people and we are proud.
All that and much, much more over the next hour here on The Curator with me, Chris Chermak. Welcome to this edition of The Curator. We'll start today with Thai-Australian relations. The Prime Minister of Thailand is in Australia for high-level talks this week, but these are not the usual run-of-the-mill diplomatic encounters between two countries. Elected just under a year ago, the Thai PM Anutin has been laying out his vision for future developments in the region in what's been a changing landscape since the second Trump administration. The Myanmar president has also been in Thailand recently. On Wednesday's Globalist, Fanula Sweeney was joined by James Chambers, Monocle's Asia editor in Bangkok, and also by Paul Osborne, reporter in Brisbane, who broadcasts for ABC Australia and Times Radio. Paul began this segment by explaining the announcements that were made following these talks.
Yeah, so a really interesting statement that came out from this meeting talking about wanting to deepen an already relatively successful relationship, trade and security relationship in particular, between Thailand and Australia. I mean, this is the first time a Thai PM has made an official visit to Australia in well over a decade. And those trade, defence, law enforcement issues particularly important. There is scope certainly to expand economic cooperation between the two. Trade between Thailand and Australia has already gone up in the first half of this year by around 40%. Thailand is Australia's 4th largest trading partner in Southeast Asia, though that is dwarfed by the scale of Thailand's economic ties to China. So the joint statement that followed the meeting between the two leaders talks about a commitment to supply chains, to reducing vulnerabilities, and these are common diplomatic euphemisms in talks between leaders in this region for trying to diversify away from an over-reliance on China. It talks about the link between economic resilience and national security. Again, that's a fairly standard way of saying we don't want this nation to be dominated by China without explicitly saying that. And indeed, the word China doesn't appear once in the joint statement that accompanied the talks.
Oh, that's very interesting. We're going to go now to James for a moment, our Monocle's Asia editor, who's in Bangkok. I mean, we heard just at the start of the programme the Thai Prime Minister saying, you know, the more constructive relationships we build, the more options we have. So obviously this potential overdependence on China is very much on his mind.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the pictures of the Prime Minister in Australia show him very happy. I mean, he's having a bit of a dreadful time on the domestic front at home, so I'm sure he'll be very happy to be away. But as Paul quite rightly said, top of his list is to basically try and drum up business for Thailand Inc. because the economy is struggling here, and it is very reliant on money coming in from China. I mean, the Thais are very happy for Chinese investors and Chinese tourists to come and spend here. But they have suffered in the past when those kind of taps are turned off, and so the word that Prime Minister Anutin is using is economic resilience, and that is about looking for other markets for Thailand to do business in and to invest in Thailand. And it's worth remembering that Australia, even though it's got a relatively small population, is a massive economy in these parts. I mean, it's only behind China, Japan, and India in terms of the size. So, for the Thais, it should be a place where they can do business.
And the Prime Minister, James, elected just under a year ago. How much of this decision to want to build more constructive relationships for greater options for Thailand is a departure from previous Prime Ministers?
Well, I mean, he gave a speech yesterday at the Lowy Institute in Sydney, and he made it very clear that Thailand is not going to choose sides. They're not going to pick between the US and China. They want to be friends with both. So this is not about that type of security. I mean, he is very much on a trade mission. He's got a whole bunch of Thai conglomerates coming with him. He has his commerce minister, his finance minister, his trade minister, his labour minister, and they spent the whole day yesterday meeting with business. So, it's clearly his goal to try and get the Thai economy out of its funk and try and essentially take the Thai economy into the future, because it has been very dependent on kind of low-level manufacturing. It's very agricultural. And it wants to move now to the next level and attract, more sophisticated investors and businesses, especially in the technology field. So it's very interesting that yesterday he visited the headquarters of Canva, which is an Australian unicorn, like a graphic design platform. It's a huge business. It's just opened a kind of small office in Bangkok, and and the Prime Minister paid them a visit. And they obviously want Canva to, provide more jobs for Thai, graphic designers and designers. It's Thailand's very strong for creativity. So that's the kind of direction that Prime Minister Anutin wants this two-way trade between Australia and Thailand to go.
And Paul, what is it that Prime Minister Albanese might have been looking for in these talks?
Well, certainly trade is a very important thing for Australia too, of course. It wants to see an expansion in that trade relationship. And I think Australia is acutely aware that it wants a closer strategic relationship too. But Thailand, as you were just hearing from James, has very strong incentives to want to preserve ties to China. Thailand's historically pursued this sort of flexible, non-aligned foreign policy. Wants good relations with China, wants good relations with Australia. And in trade terms, Australia knows that it's trying to compete with a relationship in the Thailand-China trading relationship that it can't match in scale. So in a way, it's trying to offer quality over quantity on things like science, on clean energy, on tech, on defence, on law enforcement. There's an awareness in Canberra. Thailand doesn't want to have to choose a side. And Australia doesn't want to ask it to. But instead, what it is doing is trying to make sure that Thailand has more than one option going forward by strengthening its trade relationship with another key economic power in the region.
James Chambers and Paul Osborne there speaking with Fionnuala Sweeney on The Globalist. This is The Curator. To Brazil now, where the race to become the country's next president kicked off in earnest this week. The current left-of-centre president, 80-year-old Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, is seeking a historic fourth term. His main rival, the right-wing challenger Flávio Bolsonaro, son of the now-imprisoned former president Jair Bolsonaro, has narrowed the gap. So what is at stake in this election, and who are the 6 candidates, including Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Bolsonaro? Well, joining Fionnuala Sweeney and myself on Friday's episode of The Globalist was Monocle's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Fernando began by outlining the main issues and the polls in this election.
Well, yes, it is 6 weeks away, and it's a very important election for Brazil. And of course, Lula is representing there the left, and he's trying to win a 4th non-consecutive term. He is the favorite by a small margin. But Flávio Bolsonaro, of course, Jair Bolsonaro's son, is catching up, and this election is going to be very, very tight. So the last numbers I have for you, in the first round, Lula would get 38% and Flávio Bolsonaro 31%. On the second round, because if you don't get 50% of the vote, most Brazilian elections go to the second round, Lula would win 43-40, very, very tiny margin. And some are even saying that this election could be win in the first round because we don't have a very strong third candidate this year. So it's going to be quite an interesting election, Fionnuala.
So what are the issues and what does it say about how polarised the country is?
It's interesting because Brazil remains polarized, but I wouldn't say radicalized, because in 2022 and 2018, they were very difficult elections. So at the same stage, we'd had more scandals, more fights in the streets, more kind of passion, I would say. I think Brazilians, there's a sense of apathy at the moment as well, perhaps because people are tired. Oh, it's Lula again. And it's one of Bolsonaro's son. And you ask me, what are the issues? There are many issues, of course. Security, I would say, is one of them. And it's interesting because we had some positive numbers. Brazil, most recently we got, the annual number of homicides in Brazil, they fall to almost a historic low. But the sense of insecurity is there. So it doesn't matter when you have good numbers if people are still feeling insecure. But of course, there's the economy. There's many other kind of, topics that are important in this year's election.
Fernando, this was the week that the campaigning sort of officially started. Give us a little feel of what a campaign is like. Flavio Bolsonaro holding his first campaign event in Sao Paulo, which of course you know very well. What is an election rally like in Brazil?
It's funny because I mentioned the word apathy, but listen, even a more calm Brazilian election is more exciting than in many other countries, because when you were there, it's on TV. We still have those cars with kind of jingles, announcing their candidates. And even on TV, because according to the law, a few times a day, you have to show like half an hour of the candidates. Politics, exactly. And one thing about Brazil, they have incredible jingles. We don't use necessarily songs by famous artists like in many countries like the United States. They actually make songs for the campaign. It's such a nice mixture. In fact, we prepared a little montage for you with some of the jingles this year that was cleverly edited by Christy Evans. Let's have a listen.
Só mais Silva, uma estrela que brilha. Ele é brasileiro, trabalhador e família. São Paulo, Marina é São Paulo, Simone é São Paulo, a tática com você. Eu vou votar no Renan, eu amanhã eu vou votar no 14, como fosse a vingança do povo. Com dedicação, o cara é decente, faz pela gente, pega a visão.
Oh my goodness.
It's dangerous, because sometimes the jingle is great, but then the candidate, you have a look and say, oh, very corrupt, a lot of problems. But, that's how life is.
Why let that get in the way? Can I ask you, if we sort of take a wider look at the region? I mean, this is an important election, not only for Brazil, but, we've seen countries recently in South America like Argentina, Chile and Colombia elect right-wing leaders. So what would it say if Bolsonaro is elected? What kind of signal would it send? And presumably Donald Trump would be very happy.
I mean, if Flavio Bolsonaro wins, it would be amazing news for the right in the region. As you know, a lot of countries are turning to the right. So I think Trump would be very excited. But that's the interesting thing about Flavio Bolsonaro that I have to say as well. He's very close, of course, to Donald Trump. They are very aligned, the Bolsonaro family and Trump. But Trump is not helping the right in Brazil, because I think, all those trade wars between both countries, it's really harming, because there are a lot of voters on the right that says, well, this is not benefiting our country. So they have to be very careful with how close they want to be of Trump. But at the same time, they need Trump. Of course, we're dealing with the United States, a very important country economically to Brazil. But they're in a very difficult situation, much easier for Lula, I would say. This trade war actually is good news for Lula.
Fernando Augusto Pacheco there, speaking with myself and Fionnuala Sweeney on Friday's edition of The Globalist. This is The Curator. Now to the foreign desk and U.S. politics, where the Democratic Party faces its next major national test in November for the congressional midterm elections. The centrist and progressive wings of the party have each claimed some victories in the primary cycle ahead of those elections, but will one side win in the party's eternal struggle for primacy? Well, to hear the pitch from the progressive side, Andrew Muller was joined by Usama Andrabi, the communications director of Justice Democrats, one of the political action committees buoying the left of left wing of the party. Andrew began by asking what lessons they had drawn from their recent victories.
Yeah, I think this has been our most successful cycle to date. We are sending at least 7 new leftist progressive members to Congress since our founding nearly a decade ago. And I think it's a clear signal that Democratic voters in America are ready to move on from an establishment that's been bought and sold by corporate donors and billionaires, and is ready to let working class candidates represent working class communities. And these candidates that we've run have really built campaigns that are movements that everyday people see themselves in, and are finally really leading with an affirmative agenda that centers their most crucial needs, like the affordability crisis in America. And that looks like both fighting for things like universal health care through Medicare for all, but also fighting to end taxpayer funding for a genocide that billions of our dollars are going to every year. And connecting those dots has really ignited, I think, a movement of Democratic voters nationwide. I think we have learned a lot of lessons from how to excite the Democratic base that this past 2 years has been really frustrated with the Democratic Party and the establishment. And I think really more than anyone, we are providing a roadmap to so much of the Democratic Party and the corporate Democratic establishment about how they can win their base back.
I mean, a lot of that platform of yours, which includes things like cancelling student debt, taxing the rich, stronger unions, Medicare for all, a lot of that sounds probably pretty mild to most of our European leaders, but obviously the American and European political spectrums, two very, very different things. You mentioned earlier that this kind of stuff excites the Democratic base, and it doubtless does, or at least a section of that base. But where are you on the conventional wisdom, which I'm sure you've heard once or twice before, that this is all very well for winning primaries, but it frightens off perhaps less committed, more mainstream voters?
Yeah, I've been hearing that my entire life. And yet right now we're in a Republican trifecta led by Donald Trump and Republicans leading the House and the Senate. And the people that led us there were the very same corporate Democrats and establishment who are fear-mongering about the left and socialism and taxing the rich and giving everyone health care. That all sounds really scary to the same billionaire donors who back the corporate establishment. But I think we should be honest and look back at who got us into this mess and who we've allowed to lead the Democratic Party for so long. It is those moderate corporate Democrats who brought us to the point where we have a Donald Trump again as president. And I think just like in any other business or organization, it's time to clean up shop in the Democratic Party and not let the same people who led us here lead us out. And I think more important right now than trying to chase the mythical purple centrist moderate voter that we do every 2 to 4 years in America that are on the margins, we have a problem with our own base. If you look at the polls, poll after poll shows that the Democratic Party's own base voters are so frustrated with its leadership and find them extremely unpopular. And so before we can win people, independent voters, purple voters, we need to win our base back. And we need to excite our base that is really disaffected by this Democratic Party. And we can do that by showing in these deep blue districts where we win primaries that another way is possible to chart a path forward for this party.
I mean, how much of this strikes you as generational, though? Because obviously Justice Democrats candidates tend towards the younger edge of congressional candidates. And it is alarming to think a generation of Americans now in their early 30s whose entire political experience as adults has been dominated by the peculiar figure of Donald Trump. Do you think that's what we're starting to see emerge now, a certain radicalization among that cohort?
Without a doubt, young voters, as they always have, generation after generation in America, have powered grassroots movements, have powered the move for the party to move leftward and become more progressive. You want to look at the civil rights movement, you want to look at the anti-war movements of the mid-20th century in America. The same young people were powering us to civil rights legislation. They were powering us to end the war in Vietnam, as they have sort of time and time again. But I do want to caution us against flattening this to a simple generational argument, because I don't believe this is simply about replacing, if that was the case, then people would be ready to replace their old corporate shills with young corporate shills. But that's not what I think Democratic voters are looking for. And I think what's also appealing is that there is a new generation of leaders who are willing to take on Republican fascism and extremism with the same urgency and strength that they are willing to take on the corporate rot in the Democratic Party. And that's what voters are looking for. And, I think it's no surprise that in many of the districts that our candidates are winning, there's a large portion of that is powered by young voters who are coming out in massive numbers. And I think it's important to note that those are young voters of all classes, of all races, because we often try and see this argument that this movement is a movement that is reserved for wealthy, white, educated folks in urban areas, which I think is simply wrong on the facts.
Usama Andrabi, Communications Director of Justice Democrats there, speaking on the Foreign Desk with Andrew Muller. Well, last weekend, a 6-month tour of the United States wrapped up that brought out crowds in the tens of thousands. This was no pop star, but rather a traveling exhibition of 9 of the founding documents of the United States as part of the America 250 celebrations. On loan from the National Archives for the first time, the precious papers traveled in a Boeing 737 that was dubbed the Freedom Plane, a play on a similar initiative during the U.S. bicentennial in 1976. Well, Monocle's Seattle correspondent Gregory Scruggs joined the final stop and sent us this report.
A nation roiled by the aftermath of the Vietnam War, Watergate, and the oil crisis faced the awkward prospect of celebrating its 200th birthday when it wasn't in much of a celebratory mood. One tonic to boost the bicentennial spirit? The Freedom Train, a rolling exhibition whose 26 carriages contained over 500 historical treasures, from the weighty historical, like George Washington's copy of the Constitution, to the more pop cultural, like Judy Garland's ruby red slippers from The Wizard of Oz. Steaming around the nation from mid-1975 through 1976, the Freedom Train, with its custom red, white, and blue paint job, was a hit, stopping in over 500 cities and bringing 7 million people aboard. Dolly Parton and Porter Wagoner even recorded a theme song.
All aboard America, here comes the Freedom Train.
"50 years later, the concept has been revived with a modern twist on the mode of transport. A Boeing 737 with custom livery took off from Washington, D.C. in March to embark on the Freedom Plane National Tour, subtitled Documents That Forged a Nation. After multi-week stints at museums in Kansas City, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Houston, Denver, Miami, Detroit, and Seattle, preliminary estimates suggest that over 150,000 people lined up to see original documents printed with the 18th century turns of phrase that are etched into Americans' collective memory, from "We hold these truths to be self-evident" to "We the people, in order to form a more perfect union." The tour is a rare bright spot in a semi-quincentennial year that has not exactly united a divided country. America 250 celebrations in the nation's capital, like the Great American State Fair, fell prey to partisanship. Trump loyalists came, his detractors, including several prominent musicians booked to perform, stayed home. An ultimate fighting championship contest on the South Lawn of the White House was derided as a tawdry spectacle by those enamored of neither MAGA nor mixed martial arts. So perhaps it was precisely the Freedom Plane's departure that made it so successful, taking these symbols of national identity out of the capital and into the hinterlands, where eager crowds of everyday Americans, motivated by plain old love of country, provided a real-world antidote to Hollywood fantasies like the dystopian secession flick Civil War. To better understand the Freedom Plane's impact, I spoke with one of the museum leaders tasked with putting this precious cargo on display.
Well, I'm Leonard Garfield. I'm the executive director of the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle. And behind that door are the founding documents of America. So the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and others.
And we are standing here in the lobby of the museum in the atrium under a large American flag, appropriately enough, and with the buzz and the sound of a crowd of people lined up down the hallway in the waning days of this national tour. What has been the significance of this exhibition as a museum director, as a historian, in terms of what it's meant for really an American sense of identity and perhaps even national pride at what has been often a difficult and divisive time in this nation's recent history?
Well, I think this exhibit reminds us that we are a nation of ideas, and we're also a nation of ideals. And interestingly, when there have been polls of ideas, 90% plus of Americans believe in the Declaration of Independence, that all men, all people are created equal. That revolutionary statement from Thomas Jefferson has now become something that Americans unite around. That seems like a low bar to come around that ideal. That seems so core, and yet it is so revolutionary. It is still aspirational in terms of its true fulfillment, but that's what unites us as Americans, and we see that in this exhibit.
Do you have a particular document that you're hosting here in this institution that you've been most excited to see under the glass?
Well, the showstopper is the Declaration. I mean, the greatest document in Western history, some would argue. But to me, the most powerful in some respects is the draft of the Bill of Rights, where you see a markup where certain rights are crossed out and other rights are modified, reminding us that this is a country that is based on self-government. And that means we create government in the real time, that it's organic, that it changes, and that actually that power now resides with us in the present day. And so to me, seeing the markup of the Bill of Rights at its moment of creation, but knowing that it is not done yet, we can still evolve and modify our government. That's the power that those documents hold. That to me is very, very powerful. I guess another one would be the Treaty of Paris, and that's just for the fun of seeing Benjamin Franklin's signature. I mean, who doesn't like Benjamin Franklin, right? And to know that he was in there wheeling and dealing with the French and finally settling on a treaty that would, in a global sense, recognize us as a true independent sovereign nation. That's pretty powerful, too.
Do you anticipate we might have a bit of American civics and history revival as a result of the Freedom Plane Tour?
Well, I think the celebration of 250 years versus 200 years, 50 years ago, is really quite different. The bicentennial Freedom Train was really a party. It was a celebration. It was all kinds of things. It was archival documents that were very important, but it was also things from movies and American inventions. I think this tour has been more thoughtful. It's been more focused on what are the core documents, and by extension, the core values that bring us together. In this hyper-partisan political environment, we can step back from that and find some sense of identity, some sense of unity, and actually even really an aspirational path toward the future. And I think that that's different than just celebrating in a party sense. It's really a very thoughtful celebration, which of course makes sense. We're a nation founded on ideas, and so we're going to celebrate our 250th by reflecting on those ideas in a very thoughtful way.
Thanks there to Gregory Scruggs in Seattle. Still to come here on The Curator, we'll get a peek at the reopening of the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon. It's the venue for Monocle's upcoming Quality of Life conference, and we'll hear from the Brazilian singer Silva. Stay tuned.
Craft matters. In small ways, like how a coffee is brewed. And in not so small ways, like how your money is cared for. Which is why for 160 years, UBS has elevated banking to a craft. Tailoring unique strategies that combine human expertise with the latest technologies. All happening across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs. With you at the heart of it all. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, a new issue of Monocle magazine is out on newsstands this week, and it features the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon, which houses one of the world's most important private art collections. It just reopened to the public after more than a year of renovations, and Monocle's senior foreign correspondent Carlotta Rebello was there on the opening day. She joined Fionnuala Sweeney on The Globalist on Thursday.
The museum is stunning. It was closed for nearly 2 years, just 18 months, and it's one of the major renovations. They rethought the way the architecture works, and one of the fascinating things was when I met with the team that was responsible for this revamp, and they were telling me about this crucial moment in the process when they found old photographs from the 1960s, and when they saw how the museum was originally built and intended, they just knew they had to bring that spirit back. Now, to give you a picture, this is an incredible piece of architecture, mid-century and brutalist, that sits in the Gulbenkian campus here in Lisbon, which is beautiful, and it's basically been restored to its former glory, allowing the pieces to shine. And then there's some technical parts too, the ventilation is better, the security is better, and also the lighting. So it's never been as good as it is now.
And you had an opportunity to speak to the museum's director.
Yes, the new director, Xavier Salomon, who joined the museum this year, so halfway through the process. And he was coming from the Frick collection in New York, where he had overseen a renovation of that museum too. And I was joking with him saying, if he's now going to be the director of renovations whenever a big art institution globally needs someone to oversee that. But it was interesting speaking to him to get his thoughts, not just on the Gulbenkian Museum as an institution itself, because it is one of the largest private art collections in the world. But I was curious to hear from him the differences in discovering the museum, not as a visitor, but now as a director.
I think every good director should spend a certain amount of time every day in the galleries, just to see how the public interacts with works, but also to live with the works in a way and look at them. So I'm trying every day to look at different things. And obviously, not only reading the labels, I had to read all the labels of the museum before they were printed, but reading books and, what you have on my desk, there are files on specific objects that have the whole history of that object. So I'm sort of learning also that way. That's in the field that I know about. The other fields, when it comes to Japanese or Islamic, to some degree antiquity, they're fields where I'm not an expert. I did not study in those fields. So everything in a way is a discovery. So the excitement of, learning about certain techniques, certain moments in history, certain exchanges, that to me is just a brand new world. And in fact, often when people ask me about my favorite objects, they're objects outside my field of expertise rather than the ones that I know better and have studied.
They are leaving a mark on you.
Yeah, yes. Absolutely. And it's this fresh excitement. People think, you study, you go to university, and that's the moment you learn, and then you're done. That's not the case. I mean, if you don't learn something new every day, I think, what are you doing? That's the excitement for me, discovering new places, discovering new things, new objects in the museum, outside the museum. And also, the journey of learning about other institutions in Lisbon, in Portugal, it's just been fantastic.
After seeing the museum, I guess, closed for so long and looking at all the tiny details, and now finally it's out there, it's open to the public, people are now, as we are speaking, coming through it. How did it feel for you this morning and over the past week when you faced people's reactions to the work for the first time?
It's been very different feelings. I think, having the press walk through first and their reaction was fascinating, and their questions and their responses to what was happening in the museum to me were really, really interesting. Then we had an opening for our staff, and that was more of a family thing where suddenly it was like, everyone who's worked so hard on this project could celebrate each other and see that. And that to me was just really moving and wonderful. Then yesterday, was the more official institutional party. And for me personally, as a museum person, it's the first time that I am presenting a project of this scale to the President of the Republic, to the Minister of Culture, to the Mayor of Lisbon. So the fact that these people were there, and the museum is so important to the city, to the government, to the state, to the country, was hugely overwhelming and moving. And then this morning, totally different feeling, because this is it. This is the real thing. I mean, for the last 45 minutes, people are coming into the museum and just seeing those galleries populated with people. Those galleries a week ago, 5 days ago, were still a building site. I mean, we were still installing things, sorting out the lighting, the labels. So there it is. It's alive again in a way. It's just after a long surgery, someone coming back to life and walking again and just being alive. And it just feels very, very, very exciting. It's not a new birth, it's not a new creature, because it's a creature that people already love and know. So that feeling, the fact that you're giving back this to its real owners. And, as a director, I don't own the place. I'm just shepherding the place and making sure everything works. It is the public really that has ownership of this place.
Now, you joined halfway through this renovation process. Once you were, I guess, settled in and ready to dive into work, what were some of the things that had a particular input from you in terms of the renovation?
I think the two main things I would think of, one was a very practical management decision. So this was a very big project done in a very short time with a lot of different constituencies. And there wasn't an internal person that was managing all of that. So I had to appoint someone. So I appointed a project manager from within the museum. She's called Anna Teresa Torsch. And she really became the key point of the project. So I had one person within the museum that could actually oversee everything. It may sound like a boring or minor thing, but to me it was a big, big change. When it came to decisions about the architecture or the space, I think there were two. One was this idea of trying to keep the windows as clear of screens or impediments as possible to have this relationship with the garden. And the other one was to bring back the carpeted floor, which was something that I always thought about even before I worked in the museum. I always thought, I wish there was a carpeted floor there as it was originally. I asked the question when I first arrived. I think it was literally the first week I arrived. I said, why are we not reinstating the carpet? And it was done. And I think it's been even more of a game changer to me than I was expecting, actually. And so when I started seeing it laid down, I suddenly realized it was the right thing. And it's the visual, but it's also the physical experience of walking on it, the sound, all of that is incredible. When I decided to do this, there were very different reactions from people. The architects with the project really loved the idea. But then a lot of even members of staff absolutely hated it. There is this idea that, carpets are old-fashioned and dusty and all that. With many decisions, you think, okay, what do I do? You have some people pro, some people against. And then I said, I'll follow my instinct. I think this is right. I'll defend this decision and went along with it. And to me, the big moment was when I met someone who I actually really, really admire, Manuel Aires Mateus, who's a great architect here in Portugal, someone that I admired even before coming to Portugal. And we were talking about the renovation, and he said to me, there's one thing you should do that would be a total difference. And I said, what? And he said, I'm sure you're not going to do it, but you should think about it. It's you should really put back the carpet. And I said, we are putting back the carpet. And he was so excited. And the fact that someone that I admired so much validated that idea, I thought, okay, this is, I was very, very glad about that.
And that's so interesting there, because he's talking about the interaction of the visitors with the collections. And I'm just wondering, what is it can visitors see in this museum? Because presumably his directive had been to engage, innovate, find a way to engage the visitors to the new revamped collection.
So what was quite interesting is that in this case, this is a finite collection, It was a collection of Carlos Gulbenkian, who had incredible taste and picked pieces, that range from, the Persian times to Chinese porcelain, Japanese art, to some of the European masters too. So it's not a collection that can be added on like we see in other institutions. So what you have here is a collection of, it's 6,000 items in total, around 1,000 are always on the permanent display, and it just ranges a time period that's incredible. And they have this special room towards the end, as you reach the end of, the circuit in the museum, that is the Lalique room, which features the works of the renowned French jeweler. And outside of France, it is the biggest collection of Lalique work. So you end up having these incredible gems of micro collections and items from artists that outside of their native region, this ends up being where you have the best display of it. So it really is a fascinating museum that is now reopened to the public. And just to pick up on a point that Salomon was making there, towards the end about bringing back, the carpeted floors, which was controversial and loved at the same time. The architect that he mentioned, Manuel Aires Mateus, who kind of gave him the validation for that decision, is going to be one of the speakers at the Monocle Quality of Life conference, which takes place at the Gulbenkian Foundation in the campus where the museum sits. So for listeners who are curious about visiting the museum and discovering more about some of these themes and meeting as well as some of the people behind the works, there's still, of course, some tickets left at monocle.com to join us on the 4th of September at the Gulbenkian.
Carlotta Rebello, Monocle's senior foreign correspondent, speaking with Fionnuala Sweeney, also hearing there from the director of the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon on The Globalist. You're with the curator on Monocle Radio, and we turn to books now, which have rarely looked more fashionable. But there is growing evidence that we are actually reading less, especially the kind of sustained reading that demands our full attention. So what are we losing when we stop reading properly? On Monday's edition of The Globalist, our editorial director Tyler Brûlé was joined by Lara Croha, advisor at Park Books and Never Stop Reading. It's a Zurich-based bookstore for architecture, photography, art, design, and English books. Tyler began by asking Laura to define her bookshop.
The most important thing is that we're a specialized bookstore, right? We focus on art, architecture, design, and photography. And what you will not find at our store is the latest New York Times bestseller stocked in like the 20s, And you come to our store to find something that you didn't know existed before, and that's our greatest quality.
And the space that you fill in Zurich is a unique one, because this is a city which is famous, of course, for outstanding graphic design. Of course, this is home to some of the world's best architects, and of course, an incredible built environment as well. Of course, you're catering not just in German, but of course, English language titles are easy to find as well. But in terms of the landscape of bookstores in Zurich in general, how are you feeling? Because we have one, for our listeners who don't spend time here, there's one big national chain, Oro Fuseli, who is, of course, a big player. And then it's a world of independence. And I'm wondering, how is it for an independent right now?
Rather lonely, to be quite honest. We're one of the last bookstores in town to stock that variety, especially in those fields. So we would, of course, love to have more players in the game, but we're trying to stay strong.
and just I want to throw it over to Georgina in a second, but what type of sort of galvanizing forces are there to, and of course there's national booksellers associations in this country like elsewhere, and I think one thing that we're seeing, and Georgina, you might find this interesting, our friend James Daunt, behind the likes of Barnes & Noble and of course Waterstones in the UK, they're also buying up a lot of independent bookstores, keeping them independent in name, but using the back end, as you know, for logistics, etc. Is that a move that we'll probably see here, or do you think it's going to be this divide of still having one national chain and then a lot of independents doing their very best?
Yes and no. I think bookstores are dying right now. That's the truth. And the big chains buying up the smaller stores. Yes, we're looking at a monopoly there, so to speak. And I don't think, or the wrong way is to put it, that there will be a lot of independent bookstores. It will be just a few, very few, with privately owned that will make the game or will win, and a lot of others are going to die, and this is dangerous, to be quite honest.
Georgina, back in London, of course, you're speaking to authors all the time. You're spending a lot of time at festivals, talking to people. Just when you're talking to booksellers, what's top of mind, or sort of when you're listening to Laura, what stands out?
I think that it is the demise of the independent bookstore. People are very, very worried about that. Huge online retailers, of course, are gobbling up the custom. But the sort of whole public reading thing, I mean, you started off by saying that it's kind of fashionable now. And of course, I don't know if you've seen that online sort of thing, Tyler, Hot Dudes Reading. It's fabulous.
Missed that, but you can send me the link.
It's pictures of really nice looking men reading real physical books. And I think there's nothing that actually beats that. And also going in and having the whole bookstore experience. You want an experienced bookseller who knows what they're doing. They're not flogging apples, right? They're flogging intellectual stimulation, and it means reading a person, it means knowing your material and all of that. I actually have a best-selling author with me, David Badanas. David, what is your take on this? How is it all doing in that world?
The big stores are terribly seductive because when they put their shoulder behind something, they have enormous results. So a lot of authors who quietly at dinner tables say they're going to really try to push only for independent stores, when they get the tap on the shoulder and say, by the way, would you like to move 300,000 books this week? We unfortunately say yes. The big difference is between changing your views and confirming your views. And a lot of bestsellers and things that are pushed on the bestseller tables, they simply confirm your views. An independent bookstore will have a range of things, like our friend in Zurich, using her ideas to say, have you considered this? Video images are especially dangerous because there's always an assumption in them. If you have a little video, a reel of a riot somewhere, you can comment on it, but you assume that there's a riot. While in a book, you could step back and say, well, there's a city of 3 million people. There wasn't really a riot. It's hard to get perspective from video.
Georgina, we have a lot of nodding
yes,
here.
Oh my God, I'm so happy to hear this.
What is your take on that?
Well, the digital media and social media, what you see up there is books being an object, a powerful symbol of lifestyle, aesthetics, of your identity. And what you said about confirming your own views, that's so important. Think about tropes. Mm-hmm. Say, lovers to enemies. This is very popular with my generation right now. But what that is it's a key word. And your favorite influencer tells you, look, this book, Enemies to Lovers or Age Gap, and you immediately know I will like this or I won't. And it's what you know already. And the great quality of a well-curated bookstore is to challenge your views, to find new ideas, to expand your horizons. And also for the authors, it's so... We stock authors that are not usually seen at the big stores, at Aurel Fuseli. That's the quality behind it. And it's books are a democratic tool, and if we read only what confirms our views, we lose that ability to challenge ourselves.
Lara Koha there of the Zurich-based bookstore Park Books, speaking with our own editorial director and chairman, Tyler Brûlé. And finally, on this week's edition of The Curator, for Monocle's summer newspaper, Med, Mountains and More, our own musical curator, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, picked his album of the summer. Curious? Well, it is the Brazilian singer Silva, and it's called Holiday. Fernando also spoke with Silva, who told him about the sunny inspirations for the album, why Brazilians have a different cheeky spelling for the word holiday, and more. Here is the sunny optimism of Silva.
Cê faz que não vê, mas eu te vejo. O corpo que fala sem querer. Reflete no olhar igual espelho. Espero num claro amanhecer.
I started making this album and writing and being inspired for the songs just after Carnival. So Carnival last year was amazing. I had a lot of nice gigs, nice concerts, and I played in Recife, and it was huge. I've never played in that stage before. It was a great experience. And then I came home after all of that. I grabbed my guitar. It was summer for us, very warm, but also the most beautiful days and very sunny days. I was inspired by it. So the songs, I made all the songs in one time. Like I had like 10 days or 15 days, and I had like almost everything written, and I had like 5 songs or not 7 songs or 8 songs almost. So it was very inspiring, and that's why it's called Holiday in a Brazilian spelling way.
And explain to us why the Brazilian spelling, because there is a Brazilian film as well that is very famous, which is Bye Bye Brazil. So I love the fact that it's on the Brazilian spelling, which is Rolidei. I think it's so cool.
This film, Bye Bye Brazil, is very important for us, for me as a musician, because it talks about the influence of American culture in Brazil, in Latin America, which is something that we see nowadays, what America has done with, what the United States has done with us, with Latin America. So it has a lot of criticism about it, but it also shows a beautiful side of our culture, of our artists and our music. The movie is about like artists that go to play in Brazil, like in places that nobody goes to play. So it talks about the influence of the technology and the TV going to those places and changing culture and original culture. So it's an album that I'm saying that I'm very Brazilian and that I'm very proud of being Latin American and that I love my music, I love our culture.
It's very Brazilian, but I have to say, one of my favorite tracks is Sudamérica. I think it's so beautiful. There's something quite beautiful. And don't you think, Silva, that Brazilians more and more, as a Brazilian, me as well, like we're connecting with our kind of brothers there, with our neighboring countries. I think even musically. Would you agree with me?
Eu sei o sabor da vida boa, a vida que é boa. Escuto o tambor. Me beija na boca. Eu sei o sabor da vida boa, a vida que é boa.
Yes, I do. Even with the Spanish, right? Because we're the only country in the that doesn't speak Spanish. So I'm trying to get better with my Spanish, actually. But I love our music, like Latin music, which I didn't see myself as a Latin American person a few years ago because we are kind of isolated in this continent. So nowadays it's so beautiful that we see ourselves as Latin people and we are proud of being Latin. And I've mixed a little bit of samba with another Central American genres, and I made some stuff that I didn't used to do before.
Reflete no olhar igual espelho. Te espero no claro amanhecer. Se você quiser, você vai ver. Não vai dar pra disfarçar a luz do sol, eu e você.
That was the Brazilian singer Silva in conversation with Fernando Augusto Pacheco. That's all the time we have for this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by David Stevens and presented by me, Chris Chermak. Please do join us again next week to hear some of the very best of the programs here on Monocle Radio. Thanks for listening.